Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Alan Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Office 365 focused IT security professionals. Each episode, we talk about a specific topic in this space. This week, it's episode 17 of season 2. We're going to talk around Microsoft Sentinel, a cloud native SIEM, and how it can help with your organization's security. Hey, Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, I'm doing okay. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. How are you doing with your jet lag? Are you still on Seattle time? Or are you back to native time zone now?
I think like last time, I think I'm okay. I think I'm just slowly. I'm tired in the evenings, but that might just be hard working.
So, do you think just slowly each day you're getting a little bit less tired each evening, right, and starting to get back to to normal
I
rhythm, if that
I
makes sense?
I kind of feel like I'm sleeping better, which is weird, but
Because
I
you're
don't
so
know.
tired, yeah.
Yeah, maybe yes. But yeah, so
Cool, cool. Well, the joys of going west to east, if that makes sense, right? It's always worse if I ever go to West Coast America. It's always worse. It's always been worse for me coming back, right? Like you say, like this, like drowsiness, not
mm,
just for a couple of days, And I think because you're West Coast America, the time zone shift is so there's so many hours different, right? Like it's such a gap between them. I think you can kind of get away with it if you're East Coast America. It's not quite as bad, but West Coast is just yeah, it's mental. Okay, so this week we're going to have a chat around a Sentinel, a product that Alan especially, but I as well, we spend a lot of time with day to day. So and in terms of security, it's quite a pivotal part of Microsoft's security strategy, I would say, and its tooling and offerings, and we'll go into that. So this should be a relatively nice episode. Alan is going to take the lead in terms of being the quotes experts. So I'm going to fire some questions at him to try and extract as much value and knowledge out of his brain as we possibly can, and then hopefully we can all learn something along the way. And I think even if you are potentially using Sentinel now, you might still get a few nuggets of knowledge. I'll try and probe Alan a little bit deeper on Sentinel because he's not got the excuse of like a new product, a proof of concept, or something like that. Sorry, Alan, but I will try and get as many nuggets of knowledge out of him as I possibly can. Okay, so without further ado, let's get cracking. So, Alan, can you just give us a bird's eye view, a high level like overview of what Sentinel is and what it's trying to achieve?
so yeah, Microsoft Sentinel's been around for 2 years now. I think it is maybe a little bit longer. Um, But yes, it is a security information and event management system, so a SIEM. It also has the capability of SOAR, which is security orchestration, automation, and response. And this was kind of the first, not necessarily first SIEM tool to have it all built in, but definitely cloud native SIEM that had capability sort of out of the box when it first got released. Um, it sits on top of log analytics, which some of our listeners may use day in, day out for Azure Monitor or for log collection in general around Azure. Um, but yes, it's based on that. And then all your querying against the logs and things like that is all done with Kusto Query Language, KQL. Um, and just a little bit of background around Microsoft Sentinel. In essence, Microsoft had it as a product, internal product to use as their SIEM. And as capability grew within it, they decided to, in effect, bring it into their product line because they someone internally sort of said, well, why aren't we like reselling this? It does help. It does start to compete with some of the some of the major SIEMs out there like Splunk and Logarithm, etc. out there. So yeah, that's it as a lightweight thing. There's quite a bit of capability there.
Can you just give us a really high level, like just a quick walkthrough of like, you know, logs going in versus actions coming out, so to speak? Like what are the types of things that you pump into Sentinel, and then what may be like just one example of what you then might do off of the back of any of that information coming out.
Well, to be honest, we probably need to talk about what a SIEM is,
Yep.
because it's all right me saying it.
Yeah.
And I said, the acronym for
Yeah.
it, but what does it actually
Yeah.
mean? So a SIEM tool is an environment or a product that is able to collect security logs from multiple products. So that could be firewalls, um, Windows servers, Linux servers, applications, um, and things like that, and or gateways, and so various things like that. And it's to collect security logs. So this is a location where, in effect, you're collecting all of your logs, and you keep them for X amount of time, and then that system is able to aggregate, correlate those logs. So then you can start picking up patterns within your environment. So you might be able to see, someone's. The idea is that you might be able to detect an attacker and their route and what they're compromising potentially. So it's more of a system to allow you to alert and give you sight of, or visibility at least, about what's happening within your environment. And that could be, I say, like an external attacker there, but it could be an insider, because that is a risk as well. So that's kind of its capability there, from what a SIEM kind of does, or my perspective of it anyway. So the idea is that with a SIEM and a SOAR capability is that you've got those logs, they're being ingested from various locations. Like, you can also do Azure AD within Microsoft Sentinel. Um, it then means that you can, once uh, an event has happened within those logs, determined by yourselves or by within the rules that are within Sentinel or within the SIEM. It then creates an incident. That incident can then trigger automation. So that could be, as an example, that um, a user in finance has all of a sudden got enterprise admin on Active Directory. Maybe you've got something that says, I want to detect when someone changes their role because it's rare, or you should know about it. That gets triggered as an alert. It might be a low level at this time because you don't know what's happening. Then you can trigger some automation. This could be to going check the other logs to see if there's any other activity around it, depending on what you want to do for your automation. It might just be business process. So it might be that this is triggered, so instead of someone having to watch it, it sends someone an email. Or it could be a bit more than that, that it goes off to a ticketing system and creates a ticket in there for someone to look at. And it could also do some triaging for you. Go and check, as the user recently changed their password, have they been logging on from different locations that are, not normal for them? Maybe financed is in a certain subnet, a different, certain building, and now they're logging on from the IT department or something, or something like that. So you can start detecting that sort of stuff. So you can then increase the risk of that incident or the severity. And then and then potentially, it goes to the InfoSec team, or the SOC internal or managed service, and they deal with the alert appropriately depending on the information.
Okay, so the 5 to 10 second view is you ingest your logs from like anything that spews out logs, for instance, that might be relevant to your security posture. Then you have some level of, I'll call it, rules, detections that run,
Triggers, yeah.
triggers detection. Yeah, a great word. Um, and then from that, then you can respond to those those triggers that fire. You create incidents. You shout at people and tell people about it. You might fire an automation. For some of your more critical, it might be like a user is acting weird, lock them out of their account. like whatever it is and whatever level you want to take that to, I suppose, right? And that's that's
Yes.
that's custom to your business, I suppose. Okay, that's amazing, and I think thank you very much for going through SIEM and SOAR as well, because it might be that people that haven't really started off with Sentinel, or might not, maybe maybe some people are just grabbing defender alerts, right, and actioning off of those things, and not in a singular pane, and bringing them all together in Sentinel seems to be very powerful, because it's one singular place where you can like aggregate all of those different viewpoints, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if we talk about Microsoft Sentinel itself, there is also a AI capability in the background as well. So they call it fusion rules. So in the background, it's looking at the logs coming in and the behavior, and it may trigger based on certain information. So it might be that um, there's been some or alerts or incidents been generated by the system, and we'll talk about the analytic rules in a minute. Um, Multiples of those may trigger the AI to in effect think, well, actually, I'm seeing this user trigger like 3 or 4 things in 3 or 4 different systems, so I need to like flag this up now. So I've it's a bit more intelligent or correlated sort of instance at that point.
Yeah, so it can sort of infer context around like individual alerts, bring them together, and then maybe you've got like a bunch of low severity low severity alerts for a user. Then you tie those together in some sort of chain, and you think actually this is really suspicious behavior now, because it's not just you know somebody's reset their password, it's somebody's reset their password, and then they've logged in from a different country that they don't normally log into, and then they do X, Y, and Z, and those things in isolation might not actually be that like worrisome, if that makes sense. You know Bill from accounting is logged in from a country that he doesn't work, or a new location that we've never seen before. In isolation that's absolutely fine, because Bill's down working at the coffee shop for one day. But actually, with a bunch of other context and around that, then I suppose that can be quite powerful, that you can like clump those alerts into you know into actionable incidents. So okay, amazing. Okay, so we kind of have a bird's eye view of Sentinel. Logs in, actions out, lots of very complex technology in between. But can you sort of break down Sentinel into some of its capabilities, and what those capabilities sort of aim to do for us?
Yeah, sure. So I'll quickly run through these because there's quite a few here. So you've got connectors, and this is how you get data into Sentinel, and there's various things. We'll talk about it just a minute. You've got notebooks, which are Juniper notebooks, so written in Python, and this backs onto Microsoft's AI engine that you can, or cognitive services, things like that you can use to run through an investigation. So you can almost like part automate some of the processes you might do, and see it from there. You have workbooks, which are in effect dashboards. So these are using Azure Monitor workbooks that sit on the back of log analytics. So you can visualize some of the information we're seeing, and there are some Microsoft workbooks already integrated that you can install, as well as third-party ones out there. The next bit is one of the main parts of Sentinel and the analytic rules. And again, we'll talk about this later, but this is in effect how you trigger an incident or an alert within Sentinel based on your KQL query, or based on some of the default rules in there. The next bit, again, is probably as important, is the automation. So this is where you can trigger on a incident and launch a playbook, or a logic app to, in effect, do that automation, whatever it might be. The next part is hunting queries. So Microsoft provides some out of the box there. So it's checking for certain activities within your environment, looking at all the logs, and you can build your own. And there are some solutions that can ingest some or inject some new ones, or your managed service can add some more in there. You then have advanced hunting, where you can dive into the logs themselves and write queries using the KQL to search all of the logs, however you need to. So you can do that sort of advanced hunting that way. Um, Next bit is entity behaviors. So this is using user entity behavior analytics. So based on the information coming in from Azure AD, Active Directory, and a few other data sources, it can build a picture about the user's normal behavior, and then it can work on anomalies based on that data. That can also be around devices as well, and other sort of things in Azure. The next bit is threat intelligence. So you can push in threat intelligence directly into Sentinel and then use it as part of your queries. So that's one part there. And then I kind of talked about it a little bit, but Content Hub, which allows you to, in effect, third parties to put their solutions into this Content Hub, which is like, in effect, a solution is a package of different things. So it could be a connector. So like Ubiquity have got a connector for their network products, and then they've got some default analytic rules and hunting queries and things like that. And workbooks. So Cisco and HPs and various other like firewalls and things like, and other sort of security products as well. I've put some solutions together so you can help ingest your data. And then finally, you've got the community area. Now this is going off to Microsoft Sentinels, or Microsoft's at least, Git repo or GitHub repo, and this is where Microsoft are putting all their analytic rules, any queries, playbooks, examples, things like that in there, as well as the community contributing to that. The other part to that is that you can also hook up a Git repository to Sentinel to push your content. So doing CI/CD with it.
Okay, so that was a whistle stop tour, obviously, and there is
Yes.
and I think, like you said originally, there is so many different, I'll call them, capability feature areas within inside of Sentinel. Can I just go through and just clarify a few things with you, which I
Yep.
think could be quite important. So what you're effectively saying is that analytic rules, workbooks, notebooks, basically all of these types of content that you've talked about are user managed, if that makes sense. Out of the box, is Sentinel something that is simply turn on and it's effective, or do I need to be a content expert to sort of string everything together to make an effective solution, if that makes sense?
So out of the box, there are some connectors in there to get some things in. You do have to know a bit of knowledge about how to get some of that data in. Some of it is really easy, like Azure AD. You go in there, you find the Azure AD connector, and you click connect. Because it's first party, that's it. The logs are start coming in. Microsoft Defender or the Microsoft 365 Defender suite, same thing. You tick a box. You can pull some of the other extra logs in there, and they go in. Azure Activity, relatively simple. And there's a lot of documentation about the connectors as well. Microsoft done a good job about that, and so has the third parties. So getting the data in is relatively simple. There are some weird and wonderful and complex things you may have to do for some data sources. It's not all, that's part of the reason why there's managed services and us around as well. So it's not.
Yeah. Okay,
Um,
so what you're effectively saying, if it's first party like Office 365 or a Defender
mhm.
product, what you're effectively saying is that those integrations are relatively trivial to
Yep.
do, and with the inbuilt, let's say the inbuilt alerts that come from those systems, it's relatively easy just out of the box to connect them and to start to gain value of like a centralized viewpoint for those alerts coming in, right? It seems like when you start to talk about, okay, I've got my own app that I've built internally, and I want to start feeding the logs in from that, or some some separate third party system. That's when it starts to get a little bit more advanced in terms of like the coverage of like inbuilt analytic rules and content that's inside of Sentinel. Is that fair to say?
Yep, and some of the connect to the firewalls, things like that. The common event format, Ceph stuff. It's not necessarily really difficult to set up, but it is a bit more advanced than just flicking a switch. And as you said, baked into Sentinel as a start, at least definitely for all the connectors that are in there by default, there are some templated analytic rules in there ready for you to turn on and enable based on what you think you need to see. If you turned them all on, it might be a bit too noisy because you may not need to worry about. You need to understand your environment and how it works, because every environment's different. It might be that something that you do day to day, which is absolutely fine, Sentinel will pick up and say, well, this is a bit, it creates noise or false positives. So there is a bit of tweaking in there as well, but you can definitely get a view of it, or
Okay.
a feel of how powerful it is just by turning some basic
Yeah.
stuff on.
So because everybody's IT estate, the software and systems that they have, their estate is every business is bespoke in that regard, right? The things that they do have, they don't have their license for, they do or don't want to turn on as part of their licensing and things like that. That can all make a big difference in terms of how, say, complex the Sentinel integration really is, right? In terms of content that they have to make, might have to create themselves, the connectors that they've got to do, and really we are what we're sort of saying is that somebody is going to need to champion the integration of Sentinel into the business, right? Whether that is a partner that comes in and gives you that knowledge, or a contractor, or a somebody inside of your organization that is wanting to to integrate Sentinel and to effectively skill up and understand what Sentinel does. We've got to expect that there is a level of configuration there. And opposed to that might be something like um, Defender for Office, for instance, or whatever Defender it is, that is doing all of the like the log scanning and the intelligence and hunting and everything for you. You're effectively just getting the alerts out of it. But here we're talking about potentially just like raw log streams that need to be processed and understood. It does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's a bit of understanding, or understanding what logs you actually need that are of value, because there's no point ingesting logs that you're never going to use. You need to keep it lean as and when you need it. Um, and somebody coming from another SIEM product that's looking to migrate, they're going to know that they're going to have that full knowledge about what data they want. And yes, the way you ingest the data is slightly different, but the concept's the same. So you've got that kind of background knowledge. I think if you knew, I think if you had a background in managing SIEMs, you would pick it up relatively quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, we're saying that if your organization's at a stage where it's requiring SIEM and SOAR because of its scale, regulatory, like whatever the reason is, then your sort of thought process is that anybody that's needing to look after that may be coming from a SIEM or SOAR product, and if they are, then it's not that it obviously has its own massive features and benefits, but
Yeah.
also it's not alien to other Siemens Saw products, if that makes sense. It's in the same family of
Same
products.
concepts, things
Yeah,
like that. It's not much of a much learning curve.
yeah,
There's things in there that are completely different, so there is going to be a learning curve. But
yeah,
at least getting the data in, which is the
yeah.
most important part,
Yeah.
is it's covered.
The only reason why I said that is because, like you've been through, just gone through, like I think it's like 12 different sections, right? And so that is like, if it's 12, that's 12 different things that I've got to learn about. That's 12 things I've got to know about. And when it comes to, security, especially, we know this. It's around discovery, visibility, and then the effectiveness of the tools that you put on top of that in those feeds of data. So because a lot of people can, because when you're talking about security, that's such an important part in every business, in this day and age, that understanding that you've configured things correctly and you've got the coverage that you want and the effectiveness that you want, is hard to achieve. So I think we're putting this in the this is medium to advanced specialization. If you just want intelligence, or alerts coming out of it, then you're going to have the Defender suite to help you with that. This is taking it to the next level, isn't it, in terms of automation and things like that?
Yeah, and I think it's worth sort of mentioning as well that because it's cloud native, there I don't know too much about other competitors, so I can't sort of judge about them. But I think a lot of them have been sort of you build a VM and you have to then get the disks ready and everything. They have to do backup, restore, etc., things like that. But because it's native, you only pay for what you use. So even a small organization can have this in a lightweight way. If you think about a 30-person organization or 30 user organization, they may not have like 10 firewalls and things like, going to be pretty small and probably, quite, compact. Maybe they've got a SMB firewall or something like that. It's going to be relatively trivial, really. It's going to be more about securing the devices, things like that, and Office 365 and that. So for them to use it and have that capability, even just to do alerting on unusual behavior within Office 365 and Azure AD, that's quite powerful
Yeah,
in itself, and it wouldn't cost them that much, depending on the information going in and how much we ingest. But generally, Office 365 Azure AD stuff is quite cheap. Some of it's free, which we'll talk about later.
yeah.
But
Okay, so what you're also saying is, if you happen to be the persona of a IT professional looking after a small to medium sized business, let's say 30 to 100 seats, or whatever it is, then because it's pay per consumption gigabyte, effectively, what you're saying is that starting to gain value from Sentinel can be had like relatively easy from an effort perspective and also a cost perspective, right? In getting you that singular pane of glass. Because yeah, I completely agree with you, because before I started to really get involved in using Sentinel, I kind of assumed that even smaller organizations that maybe have 10, 20 seats, something like that, it would be overkill for. But actually, even just pumping in like all of the Defender products into Sentinel to get it into like one place, if that makes sense, with all of the extra, it doesn't actually, from an effort perspective, if it's not, unless you're doing like more complex integrations and connectors, right? You can gain a lot of value just from like connecting the first party integrations from Microsoft, right? It's going to
yeah,
give you
and
that.
and
Yeah.
kind of what I was trying to get to was that if with other SIEM products, I assume, or at least older versions of them, maybe they have gone cloud native now, that you had to buy like, because you got to store that data for X amount of time. You got to buy a big, storage device with, compute and everything. You got to buy it up front, and you may not even use it, or you might not even consume all of it. So there's a big upfront cost. And like I said, you may have to buy two of them in a different location to make sure, you've got the data for your that sort of things, where, Sentinel is you pay for what you use sort of thing. So it's
Yeah.
very easy to start that journey. At least, even if you're trialing it, you can get into it a little bit and improve that functionality over time.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. 100%. I completely agree with you. So, one of the main sort of, I say one of the most important parts, probably the most important part, is firstly getting the data into Sentinel. So how easy is it to do that? And can you just sort of explain what the sort of the process is for doing that?
Yeah, so we kind of touched on it a couple of times. So one part of it is, if it's first party, most of it is click and go. So that could be Azure AD, Office 365, um, Azure activity, Microsoft 365 Defender products, and there's a few others in there that is in effect click, choose what logs you want to ingest because some of them might just be instance, click save, and then it self configures, providing you have permission to do to access those products. Once those are in, that's great. Um, there are some other third party connectors, like I said, and some of them are API based, or you need a function app, like Okta needs a function app to, in effect, pull the logs and then ingest it into Sentinel. Again, documentation's all there, all documented. It's relatively easy to set up, so it's not that difficult. Um, you've got other ones which require like I think I mentioned, like syslog or CF, common event format, being pulled in. So you have to put an agent on premise um, to, in effect, send the logs from those appliances to that, and it then ingests it. Again, not too difficult, just needs a bit of planning. And there's different, as well as that, you can do Windows servers and Linux servers. So syslog again, but with the same thing, you have to put an agent on them, which is now the Azure monitoring agent. It was called Microsoft Monitoring Agent, but they've moved to AMA. So that's fine, and that's really easy to set up as well. You can choose which logs you want to pull up, so you can make sure you don't bring up the logs you don't want. That was a slight problem or risk with Microsoft Monitoring Agent because it pulled up it pulled up pretty much everything, and you didn't have any flexibility within it. And then, yeah, like I said, there's some other connectors which have some like I said, function apps or other methods of how you get it in there. But a lot of it is very documented by the third parties, and the community is good for seeing that sort of information. So it generally isn't too bad. There are some really complex, like I said before, there are some really complex scenarios and things like that. But it's getting sort of the main stuff is quite easy. I feel it's quite easy, and 2 years ago I wouldn't have dealt with a SIEM. So I mean, I've sort of lived with Sentinel as it's grown as well. So
Okay, yeah, and I suppose what they're attempting to do is foster that community of, you know, um, third party applications and appliances, right? It's in their best interest in some respects to connect to these, these SIEM tools because of their popularity and what their customers want. And also you've got community gap filling as well, right? And sharing its insights and trying to build, the most secure, environments that they possibly can, right? Because from if you're um, if you work internally and at a company and you can build a connect or build some sort of content that you could share with the community, then effectively you are going to enrich the security of the whole community, not just your own, right? So I do. It's really amazing to see the collaboration that happens on GitHub around creating new content and sharing that with the community. It's quite amazing to see.
yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning, as you kind of said about building a connector, that is possible. It's not, if there's not a connector, that's it. You can't ingest the data. You can build a custom one, and I don't think it's too difficult. I've never done it myself. Colleagues have, but I think it's relatively easy, providing you know where the logs are and things like that. Then you can, in effect, consume them and send them up.
Yeah,
So,
because it's built on log analytics, and effectively that is for storing massive amounts of log entries, right? So I suppose, and log analytics, is been around for a long time, right? Yeah, even in its current form. So
mhm.
I suppose we gain off the back of that the maturity in terms of ingesting log events, right? And how you do that. We do have some changes happening with that, but it is great that yeah, effectively, like you said, if you've got something that produces logs, there will be a way to get it into well, log analytics and or Sentinel, which are
Yeah.
effectively the same thing. Okay, so we talked about capabilities and connections. Now, how easy is it to create like alerts and incidents? How does that process play out?
So the analytic rules are based on a KQL query. So providing you can create the use the KQL to in effect be able to search the data that's been stored. You're able to create get an output in effect about what you want to be able to find within that data. Then you can save it in effect as a log analytics rule. When you do that, then you're able to then add entity mapping onto it. So if you've got like if you're searching at sign-in logs, you can then map a user entity from that into there. So then you can look at the investigation piece. And you can do things like you can create instance, or you can just generate alerts and trigger automation. So in effect, that whole sort of bit it's relatively easy to do, providing you know what you learn a bit of the KQL and you know what you want to search for. I think that's the difficult part, is working out what you want to trigger on, and then trying to use the data to write the KQL to create it. But
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose it is all around that content creation, that rule creation. That's what's going to, to give you those insights. So should we have a quick chat around automation? And because I think that is really powerful that you've effectively got a 24/7 system looking at the events that are happening in your estate, and then what sort of level of automation that can be achieved off the back of that.
Yeah. So when you when an incident is triggered, you can then trigger a playbook. And a playbook in the Microsoft Sentinel sense is a logic app within Azure. So we've talked about logic apps previously in our one of our episodes, um, episode 13, around our serverless application architecture, and how we use them. But in effect, you can build that business process, or um, uh, some of that automation, even if it's just to create a ticket. It might be that when an instance created and it's a medium to high severity, you want to create a ticket in your ticketing system and send an email to somebody. That's relatively trivial to do in log analytics, because in fact you can do anything in log analytics that you want to, providing APIs are available and things like that in other systems. But with the log analytics or the automation, you could do something like, this user has been triggered because they've signed in, they've done an impossible travel into, they were first in the UK or the US, and now they're in in China or Australia, and there's no way, it's impossible for them to get there within 10 minutes, sort of thing. And with that, you might want to go off and email the manager and say, "Hey, are they on holiday? Should they be accessing it from the UK?" And they can have or from Australia or China. Yes, no. If they say yes, then it's fine. Dismiss the alert. If they say no, then you can go off and disable the account or reset all sessions, or just do reset sessions. The other thing that you can do is that the IP address that they're coming from, you could go and query VirusTotal to see if it's been classed as malicious at some point. So you can do that at like triaging without it being an actual person looking at it and doing that research. So yeah.
Okay, yeah, that sounds really powerful, and anything that we can do. Uh, well, I'm going to say, because I'm like a lazy ex developer, right? Like, as in, I'm all about automation, right? But it does seem really powerful that you could start to build a library of automations that could help you, triage certain situations, right? Where that it's just like impossible travel. Let's just lock about, because it makes sense to, if we've got a high probability of, you know, um, impossible travel to a region that we definitely don't have any presence in, then we should attempt to do that. I mean, that's not foolproof, is it?
No.
Whatsoever. But there is a level of, you could have a good level of overprotection there, if that makes sense, right? You could get annoying with false positives. You might have people connecting with VPNs, or glitches in the matrix, and IP address lookups that just aren't that accurate. But like you say, if you've got it, if you've got some sort of threat intelligence, like a lookup to scan against a threat intelligence feed for a known malicious IP address, X, Y, and Z, you can start to build really powerful automations from that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ones I've seen in the community or one of the firewall suppliers have done, I think it might have been Palo Alto and Cisco, um, that if if there's an incident internally and you want to block the IP address on the firewalls, in effect that playbook can go off to on premise and actually go and set that firewall rule
Yeah.
and then block it from the firewall, which is insane sort of thinking about it. I mean, it could be quite dangerous at the same time. Don't get me wrong, if there's false positives, things like that. But with extra checks, it could be that it has to be validated by somebody that says yes, go and do it. So there's a some human check kind of there. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
and one thing just to mention as well is that whilst I said that if something gets triggered and then you do it, what you can also do is build playbooks to perform actions if you're in the incident and you're looking at the information. So you can say, I'm looking at this incident. Okay, now run this playbook. So you trigger it on demand kind of thing in case there's just like an action one, like go and um, reset all the user sessions. So instead of being automated, you can go into the investigation. Go, actually, yeah, I want to do that. Press that button, go off, and do it.
Previously, you talked pretty quickly about advanced hunting. Can you sort of explain that in a little bit more depth and why that's so powerful?
So whilst you might get an instant, there's two sort of concepts, I guess. There's one that is you've got an instant and then you need to go and do some further investigation within the data because you might only get like a snapshot of an instant. This user has done impossible travel, and maybe you haven't got any other analytic rules to detect other things around that time. So by able to go into the raw logs themselves and run KQL, you can start doing that research or investigation using in effect advanced hunting. So going through the data itself and looking for those anomalies around that incident. So that's one part. The other part might be that something as you're just looking through that data, see if there's any anomalies anyway, because in effect proactive hunting, you might have some there might be a new threat that's come out maybe, and then you're just going to do some advanced hunting in the raw data to see if you can see any like similar activity around it. So you're again being proactive with your hunting. um but yeah, I think that's the kind of the couple of concepts that you've got the raw data there. You can query it and manipulate, correlate that data as much as you want to, and those KQL queries can be as complex as you want them to be. But it's relatively flexible about how you build those queries.
Okay, great. And a big topic in the security space at the moment is extended detect and response (XDR) or managed XDR. How how is Sentinel supporting that and allowing that to happen in the organization?
So Microsoft's take on XDR is using Microsoft 365 Defender, and that is using all of the Defender products. So that is Defender for Cloud from the Azure and other cloud perspectives, as well as Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Identity, Defender for Office, and Defender for Cloud Apps. So using all of those technologies that in effect feed into the Microsoft 365 Defender portal. So that's kind of building sort of the part of the XDR solution that Microsoft has, covering identity, application, endpoints, and data. But moving that data or moving the alerts into Sentinel brings that even extending that visibility even more with the third the other like the firewalls and the network side of things as well. So it's making it into that full MXDR or XDR solution at that point. And like ourselves, where we're doing managed services as an organization that we work with, there we've got our own, we're using those products as well to as our service.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we need to do an actual whole episode on XDR and how that fits into the ecosystem, right? Because
Yeah.
I think that's a really, and I think Microsoft have got some really good, and I'm sure others do, but we're sort of in Microsoft's world. I think Microsoft's got some great positioning around the value proposition of XDR and why people should be thinking holistically, single pane of view, and trying to bring everything into one place, basically. And that aligns with Microsoft's greater sort of security focus on multi-cloud and bringing things together into control planes, right? So
Yeah, and
yeah,
integrations and stuff like that. Yeah,
integrations into one singular place. So I think we should have one on XDR, because I think it's gonna really cement like our sort of one part of our security sort of philosophy, if that makes sense, and our strategy as well. So I think that would be really good for people to sort of try to understand.
yeah, definitely.
So like we do on every single topic, Alan, how much am I going to get fleeced for Sentinel? Can we talk about some costs and try and demystify sort of licensing and things like that?
Yes. So just before we talk about costings, there is a free trial for 30 days, I think it is, for Sentinel. Um,
Unlimited usage for 30 days?
uh, I believe it is 10 gigabytes of data per day, which is quite a lot for starting up.
Okay,
Um,
great.
and what we also need to mention is that some of the logs are free to ingest, so it doesn't cost you. So those are Azure activity logs. So activity happening on Azure. People changing things and things like that. Office 365 audit logs, including all of SharePoint activity, Exchange admin activity, and Teams. And that's that's going to be quite a lot of data there of what people are doing within Office 365.
Yeah, definitely.
You've also got security alerts, sorry, from Microsoft Defender for Cloud, Microsoft 365 Defender, and in effect all the Microsoft Defender products. So I'll go through them again. So Microsoft Defender for Office, Microsoft Defender for Identity, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. So all the alerts from those products, which in effect go into Microsoft 365 Defender portal, security.microsoft.com, can be pushed into Microsoft Sentinel for free. So that's a real big piece there. You've got quite a lot of your Office 365 or your Microsoft stuff going in there for free. Azure AD sign-in logs and things like that aren't free, but generally don't make too much noise or don't cost too much generally. Depends on the size of the organization at that point, but yeah. So going back to the actual costings, so it's billed by in effect gigabyte per day. If you use less than a gig, then you only get charged for what you actually use. It's not like a minimum a gig, which is good. But the minimum sort of pricing they show is a gigabyte per day. You can use the Microsoft calculator. It's a little bit complex in that you have to pay for Azure log analytics costing as well as Microsoft Sentinel on top. So you pay in effect for the storage and then the security part of it on top. But for 1 gig per day, for a month would be £135.30, which seems quite a lot, but I think it's relatively competitive to other SIEMs and their ingestion rates and costs. But that's broken down into Sentinel costing £2.29 per day per gig, and log analytics being £2.68 per gig per day. So depending on how much you're ingesting, it does depend on that. But Microsoft have a reservation sort of functionality within it, so that you can say, I'm going to ingest 100 gig a day. So they're going to that you're going to pre-commit to that, and you can set it on the Sentinel itself, and that means that you get a discount. So for Microsoft Sentinel piece, going up to 100 gigabyte per day tier is 50% off. So it only costs £1.15 per gig per day, which is I feel is a crazy discount for that first tier, especially when you hear about the Azure Monitor log analytics discount. So that means that if you hit 51 gig of ingestion per day, you might as well just go to that tiering, because then basically 51 to 100 is free at that point
Okay. Yeah.
for you, and you're paying the same thing. So that's really good. For Azure Monitor, 100 gig per day reservation tier is 15% discount. So there's a big difference. But that's probably because that's a lot of there's a lot of compute there. That's basically, it's the core of it. So I can kind of understand why it's only 15%, and that is £2.28 per gigabyte per day if in effective cost. There are other things you can do, and I think we've kind of talked about it at some point about Microsoft Defender for Cloud. That if you've got Microsoft Defender for Cloud enabled against a Windows server, then you can bring in security logs, and you get 500 megabytes per day ingestion for free, or included in the pricing of Microsoft Defender for Cloud Plan 2, is what I should say. But it works out a lot cheaper in effect. It almost cost neutrals the Defender for Cloud pricing. Yeah, and there's a few other things around Microsoft 365 E5. If you've got those things, you get something like 5 or 10 meg of ingestion per day per user for some of the logs. So for free. So there's a little bit of a discount there as well if you're E5.
Okay, so it's all consumption based. There's not, it's all Azure spend as well, right? It's not licensed through. It is, even though it's been rebranded Microsoft, it sits inside of Azure and it's billed, in that side,
Yep,
consumption based. And like as you've said, if you're anything over 50 gig, you effectively should go on to the first 100 gig a month tier, which is like a
pre-commit in effect. Yeah,
pre-commit, a reserved commit. Yeah, I don't know the actual the terminology for that, but so it's like a pre-commit value, and effectively, if you are getting to so we're saying 100 gigabytes per day, is that
yes,
right? Not
that's
100
quite a lot.
gigabytes per month.
No,
That's effectively like what, 3 terabytes per month at that, around 3 terabytes per
yeah,
month at that point, which
yeah,
that sounds like quite a lot of logs, three
and
terabytes per month, right?
and it's probably of also worth mentioning that because you've got Sentinel enabled on log analytics, your retention for 90 days is included in the pricing of that. So you can retain it for 90 days for free, but including the price, and then it's an X amount for after that. If you want to
Right.
keep it
Okay.
retained.
Okay. So I've also got a potential like log backup functionality in some respects, like an offsite backup for all of my logs really at that point as well, right? Because I could, if I wanted to, if I was a bit if I had like 3 terabytes a month, I might not do this, but I could extend out that 90 days to say 180 days or a year or something like that. Maybe I've got some sort of audit requirement or something like that. I can actually extend those values out if I want to and get retention and backup from that perspective.
Yeah, and recently the pricing changed as well around, or they gave the ability to archive logs, which meant that in effect it goes into cold storage. So you can't query it directly, but you can run you can run searches against it, and it will bring the data up and do the search for you. So, and that is a heavily reduced price because in effect you're not touching it. So it might be that you have 90 days worth of active logs, or maybe 6 months, 180 days worth of active logs, and then the rest of it is archived maybe for the other 6 months or 18 months, depending on what you need, in case you need to pull it back out of, in effect, cold storage or archive. If we think about a storage account and how their tiering of storage works that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Is there any other bits of we've been going for a while, so I think we're up to nearly an hour. I think something like that. So is there any other parts of Sentinel that you think we've missed, Alan, or anything before we start to wrap up?
Yeah, I think we didn't really talk about the investigation piece because you can in effect get um, in effect you get all the entities in a list, and you can start investigating the alerts that are all attached to that instant. But also you can build a instant graph, so you can start seeing all the entities on a page, and then you can hover over them, and then it will say, "Oh, I've seen this other activity," or they've been talking to other, this user's been on other machines, and then you can click that, and then it will show all the other devices they've been. So you can like, in effect, see what's happening with that user or that device or at that IP. As that IP tried to sign in with multiple users, and then you can realize, start seeing some realization about the attack,
Okay.
potential attack
Okay.
there.
So from
So
so if I'm some sort of security professional analyst that's doing an investigation, trying to understand effectively hundreds of thousands or millions of like log entries, right? It's effectively going to build me like a dependency graph of entities that I can visually sort of browse through and hunt through to understand, like you say, like isolate this IP address. What is this IP address done in the last 24 hours, 8 hours, whatever time period you want, and then see the interaction that that IP address has had across multiple potential platforms in your organization, and where that IP address has been used to do X, Y, and Z, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And another piece that we probably want to quickly talk about is just the entity page that I mentioned. In essence, you can go to that and you can search for a user, a device, or a Azure resource. Select it, and then it will tell you how many instances they've had against them, their active, if it's a user, their Active Directory or Azure AD information, and how many sign-ins they've had, or any Active Directory things have been, new groups added, things like that. So it's like a whole page just about a user or about an entity, which is really powerful as well if you're trying to do some general investigation, maybe, or as part of that.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yeah, no, thank you very much, Alan, for your sort of in-depth walk. Well, I say in-depth. No, it's still pretty high level, actually. To be honest with you, there's just I'd say your yeah, large quantities of areas that we've talked about, I think, is the better way of putting it. Actually, okay, let's do a little bit of reflection. So, Microsoft Sentinel is a cloud-native SIEM and SOAR a product. I think it's fair to say if you are proficient in other Siemens Saw products, you're going to feel generally at home with Sentinel. You're going to be able to quickly bring up Sentinel because it's cloud first, cloud native. There's no infrastructure to build; it's fully managed for you. So some people may see that as a benefit, some people may not. But from our perspective, um, it is possible to move quickly and with less operational overhead, which is always a bonus for people that are very busy. It helps to remediate and secure devices. I'll actually change that to entities, inside of your organization, because we're talking about, entities could be identities, they could be like devices, they could be systems, they could be many different things, couldn't they? That were sort of monitoring and tracking. Um, I would say it's probably got the most flexible license it possibly can. Full consumption based. I mean, you could also argue that that could end up, hurting larger users. But there is a very generous discounting strategy going on there with pre-provisioned throughput. Um, it's aiming to cover most, if not all, of the platforms that you've got inside of your business. um Unless, like you've talked about, first party integrations with Microsoft is obviously, top of their priority list, but also with other major, your um Oktas, your um anything else that could potentially feed in, popular firewall vendors, I'll call them network appliance vendors. There are first party integrations with those. And like you say, syslog and common event format is supported throughout to enable that ingestion. Um, so there are additional add-ons that can help to manage and do further assessments. And we've also seen that, Sentinel has, many different, I'll call them features that allow you to not just ingest this information, but then to make sense and to action that data if you then want to further on. So that's where you're getting this full end-to-end SIEM SOAR and automation, part of it, with a big focus of artificial intelligence and building of context and attack chains. Right, it's effectively um, giving you as much ability as possible to to really understand an attack or event that's happening inside of your estate, and to give you that the context, but also give you the tools to action that, at the same time, right? I do feel like from a user interface and a user experience perspective, a lot of those tools, yes, there are a lot that you need to learn, but once you've got them, they're not overly complex to learn. There's just a lot of things that are coming together to make that work seamlessly. And some log sources are free. I assume that's only first party Microsoft log sources, right? That's what they're
Some of them,
mainly
yeah.
focusing on. But there is an element of free tiering there. And I think, like you've said, with good and responsible picking of your data sources and the amount of data that's flowing in, you can get very optimized in terms of cost, and effectiveness, right? Maybe not spewing absolutely every row and all columns, or full objects, from your log source that's really really noisy. Maybe sit down and spend time to filter those log sources as they come in, right? And to really optimize your ingestion. And actually, sometimes Sentinel can be highly cost effective, right? In your organization.
Yeah, and I think that's probably tying in with our roles as MSSPs and things like that. That we have that we have that knowledge of how to optimize those logs. 'Cause, we do it with multiple customers, and we have that background knowledge about all of that. But also, while Sentinel is relatively easy to kind of set up in some scenarios, it can be quite a full-time team job to look after it and to deal with the incidents, the SOC side of things. And that's why we have a managed service to take that burden off customers and things like that, just so that we can look after all that sort of stuff, look after Sentinel. We know how to use it, sort of thing. We've got all that, all that knowledge is there, ready to be used, sort of thing. And then, the customer just has to deal with us, responding to them saying, "This has happened. What do you want us to do?" Or we're going to invoke this action you've told us we're allowed to do, kind of thing. So
Yeah,
I think there's
yeah,
that sort of part. It is depending on how big the organization is and how much risk there is about the business, because small businesses may not have this thing, but they may be in a or in a vertical that is high risk, or
yeah. Highly
preyed
regulated.
upon and
Yeah,
stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I kind of see it as an ecosystem, right? It isn't just a one and done. There is multiple aspects to Sentinel, and once you understand that ecosystem, it's gonna drive a lot of value for you, which could also lead to um, you know um, a large amount of knowledge that you need to skill up on. But once you get there, and once you see, an event happening in Sentinel, and capturing it and automating on it, it is highly powerful, right? So it is.
yeah,
I think it's worth the investment of time, and because it is an ecosystem, and all of the functionality and parts of Sentinel and all the logs are effectively in one place. You get this really nice joined up, singular ecosystem flow, if that makes sense. Of you know, from ingestion to detection to response, you get that really effective and efficient process happening. It's really great to see.
yeah. It's probably just worth quickly mentioning that Microsoft investing heavily in this product. Like, there is changes once a month, every couple of months on the private preview programs. There is always things to be testing that are coming out that are going to improve it. So it's always evolving, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, it's very very core, and I think when we do our XDR chat, it is effectively the nucleus of everything, right? It is it's the piece that can bring together bunches of different systems and logs and feed feeds, right? So it is vitally critical to Microsoft's security strategy, right? So it's definitely something that is not going anywhere quickly, right? Like Alan says, there are a lot of updates to it, that can also sometimes cause us some issues because as much as it's great that there's new functionality all the time, onboarding that into an actual managed service is has to be done with the right amount of caution, right? But it's great to see that the innovation and the building and the community and the feedback is being listened to, and that Microsoft are really engaging its security community to make it the best product it can be. Like you say, it is very impressive to see the velocity at which they are working.
Yep.
Okay, let's wrap that up for Sentinel. If anybody's got any questions about Sentinel, then yeah, drop us a comment. So next episode, we're nearly coming to the end of season 2 now. We're going to go to episode 20 of season 2. We're going to take a little break. We're going to make some changes, and then we'll come back for season 3. We won't leave it as long as we did the gap between season 1 and season 2. We're thinking like we'll finish up this side of Christmas for season 2, then we'll move on to season 3 in the new year. We've got a lot of content planned for that season already, and what we want to focus on and what we want to do. And we're just going to try and improve quality and things like that going forward. So episode 18. So we'll do episode 18, episode 19, and then we'll finish on episode 20. Episode 18, the next episode, is going to be around Defender for IoT. Now, Defender for IoT is a space that I have been focused on for quite a while now, because it is it's we need to do Defender for IoT, and then we have to do XDR after that. I think, Alan, because
Yeah.
I'm going to talk about Defender for IoT in the context of XDR and why it's important, and what Microsoft is doing, because the IoT space is, to put it mildly, complex, right? Microsoft's positioning of the product, I think is really good, but there's an inherent complexity in the different types of IoT devices, which makes the positioning of Defender for IoT a complex job for Microsoft. So I'm going to try and demystify a couple of those, because the calls that I'm on with different people around Defender for IoT, the same questions keep coming up over and over again, right? Because it is, unless you've lived in it for a while, it is hard to understand and then to explain that to, let's call it, non-technical stakeholders as well, right? To get the value propositions across. So yeah, we're gonna have a sort of a dive into Defender for IoT, what it's all about, and sort of the high level concepts of it. So yeah, it should be fun. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider subscribing. If you'd like to listen to more of this sort of content in the future, we have many different topics that we'd like to cover, and your listens and support is what continue to fuel the podcast going forward.
We also have the ability for the listeners to give us feedback or comments about this episode or the series as as general. So within the show notes, there'll be a link in there. Send us over some feedback. It really helps us, steer our content and make sure we're doing the right things.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks very much, Alan, for your time, and thanks everybody that's got to this part of the episode. I think it's going to be a long one, so cheers everybody, and we'll speak to you in the next one. Thanks. Bye bye.
Yep. Thanks everyone. See ya. Bye.